Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another tantalizing episode of FearScape Unhinged.
We're going to be talking about time travel, man. I'm telling you right now, it's going to be a blast from the past. We'll be right back.
Yeah, so time travel. Well, first of all, before we get into that, it's been a few weeks since our viewers have seen something from us.
Right. We had to figure out a creative way. We were going to do it via Zoom.
Yeah.
But I've been having webcam issues.
And I've been having bandwidth issues.
Yes. And so we said, it's a beautiful night. It's getting close to summer. Got fire we need to burn. Let's social distance.
Right.
We got permission from our wives.
We did get permission. You might be asking why we're not wearing masks. It's because
we're outside.
We're outside. Yeah, that seems like a good
And
reason.
you wouldn't be able to hear us.
Yeah.
To be honest.
You'd be like,
so.
See, exactly. You can't hear.
But yeah, we're social distancing.
4 feet.
4 feet. There you go. Yep. What?
What's it?
What?
Let me go get my cone.
But yeah, today we're going to be talking about time travel. Which
I was in a hole over there.
Yeah. We were going to talk about time travel because, quite frankly, who wouldn't want to travel back now, right? Not only would we want to travel back to before the quarantine, but, kind of wouldn't want to mind traveling forward to see where the world goes after all this.
Yeah, well, and the whole going forward thing for me is the point of going forward, as it's portrayed usually in movies and books and TV and so on, is that to understand where the human race goes, right? And then ultimately what's discovered is some calamity has befell
some apocalypse.
the human race. And so they track it back to the point in time in which it all occurred, and then everything from that point going forward is trying to figure out how to stop that from happening.
Mm-hmm. But they always talk about, it's like, oh, you got to be careful, you got to do this, you got to do that, because the past is already done. But it's like, yeah, but who decides where the past is? Because, when you're there, it's the present, right? But, the future, it's the past. So to you, the future is not written yet.
Right.
So who cares?
Right.
But,
Well,
and we ain't even getting into paradoxes yet.
Well, we haven't even talked about is that just one of infinitely possible futures.
Yeah, well, yeah, and that's my point, is that I don't think the future is written. And then there's just this whole idea, does time even exist?
It's like the line that we're on right now in time, and I say we.
I'm on a different timeline
right.
than you, bro.
Well, but really, when you think about it, so there's like it's like a woven cable, right?
Okay.
So humanity is one big cable of timelines, if you will, and then each individual cable, each individual thread, strand within that cable is individuals' own timelines, and so.
But we are, just like you said, we're interconnected. So I don't know that individuals have a timeline because they're too affected by everyone else's. Unless you're a hermit, I guess.
Well, but that would imply that what I'm doing when we're not around.
But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about when we are around.
But then what is it when we're not around?
Well, then you're woven with someone else. That's what I'm saying. It's like, unless you're a hermit, your timeline is always interwoven, because it's like, if you weren't a part of my timeline, guess what? I wouldn't be here right now. My entire timeline has changed.
So, because I'm really big about visuals, right? So, what I'm picturing in my head right now is, how when you run water across a surface, and you get these little kind of veins or arteries of water that flow, they kind of scoot across the surface and maybe touch over here and come together, and then eventually they might come apart, and then another one will scoot around, and it'll go into another one. So that's kind of like time in a way, is that it's fluid and ever-changing for everybody.
Right. Well, and then that makes you go ask the question then. It's like, is the future fading? Right? Or does this lend itself to the whole multidimensional theory, which I don't want to get into because we'll do an episode on
that's
that.
another whole other episode.
But that's all about different choices and different futures, right?
But to think about the possibility, in my mind, time travel, as it's been theorized or talked about to this point, is a very linear concept. In that we are in the present, there was a past, there will be a future, right? But really, it's almost like, and again, I'm going to try to do some type of weird visual here. There's a cloud in the past and a cloud in the future, and it just happens to come, there's like, when they come together, one single point in time, which is the present. As soon as that point passes, it goes back into the cloud that is the past, and back into the
they
cloud.
come together and they become a storm.
A perfect storm. So, I don't know. I mean, it's just...
I don't know, because like I said, because if the future can go in any direction, right?
Yeah.
If time travel forward is possible, if time travel forward is possible, in my opinion, has to only be one linear line.
But see, I don't...
Because then you're getting into dimensions.
Well, but then the question for me continues to come back to, is time travel forward? Are you leaving this point,
right,
and traveling to some specified distance in the future where this point in time has continued to exist? You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You have to think of it that way.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's like, will you be able to go, okay, I want to go to future B 2739, right? Or like C 2739. Like, it's like...
I think you would almost have to have...
And then would it be the future?
Well, I think you would have to have a focal point. It would have to centralize on something that would exist both now and in the future. And then, so you wouldn't just randomly pick a date. You would say, show me Josh's lineage in 2739.
So almost as if it's got to travel through your blood.
I don't know that it's necessarily a blood, but it's there's some aspect
because then if that's the case, it's like, could you go backwards then to other choices?
Perceivable. I mean, again, if you have, I think the big thing is just random time travel. It's kind of like a night crawler, right? He can't jump to somewhere he hasn't seen.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of the same thing. You can't travel in time to somewhere that you can't establish a relationship between where you are and where you're going.
Well, here's the other thing. I'm going to get into physics, I guess. But I brought this up, I think, in our first or second episode where I talked about, or maybe I didn't, where I talked about if time travel does exist, is it like a folding in space, a jump, or is it literally like if we travel back 100 years, will we end up in your backyard 100 years ago? Because the Earth itself moves. It turns as well as goes around. And so my biggest fears is like, what if you're like right here and you're like, cool, I'm going to go back 4 months ago, and you just end up in the dead of space.
Right. And I think that could be, so two things that I think of there. Number one is the third Men in Black with Will Smith, where he has to do the time jump. He jumps off the Empire State Building and goes back through all those layers of time. So that would be one thing. It's like, when he travels back in time, he starts from the top of the Empire State Building and he finishes at the top of the Empire State Building. So it's wherever he started from. So you couldn't just say, I want to travel to 2739 New York City if your starting point is in Kentucky. That's one thought. Second thought is, I think you're absolutely right. I think you would have to do the calculations to know specifically, very specifically, at what point in time where you're going is. It's not, because you're right. I mean, it's not just, it's really, when you're talking about mathematically, it's all the dimensions. right?
Like,
You have to understand time.
yeah,
space.
but I mean, I'm still just talking about the physical aspect. It's like if I were to hover in the air for an hour and not move, if I came down, would I land in a different piece of land?
Nope. Because you're not really hovering. Something that I've been thinking about.
So is this like, like being able, and when you're in a train car, how you can still move at your normal speed? So,
because right now, when we're sitting here, what are we sitting in? We're sitting in atmosphere.
Right.
It surrounds us all the time. That's what keeps us from exploding, because there's a constant pressure pushing on our skin that keeps us all held together, right? So that's why if you go into space and there is no atmosphere, you basically burst, because there's nothing pushing back at you to keep you contained. So when you, let's say you were able to levitate yourself off the ground, you would still stay, because where you are in that atmosphere hasn't changed. You're held, spatially held in that spot by atmosphere.
So then,
it's kind of like suspending a pea.
So then the question, the reason I asked that is, so then it's very possible that if you were to move through time, you would still be in the same spot. If you think about the Time Machine, H.G. Wells, his machine was motionless. It stayed in the same spot. It just traveled. Everything around it
changed.
Yeah. Right.
Well, and I guess that gets into how you're traveling, because the depictions of time travel, say H.G. Wells is a good example, where you're basically existing in a bubble of time.
Yeah, you're stationary.
You're stationary in a bubble of time, and everything else moves around you. But
which is what was so remarkable about the book and the movie, is how he moved it so that he could be outside the cave. Instead of just going back to the point before all that stuff happened, he moved it so that he could still exist in that same timeline in the future, but be outside of the cave. It's really interesting, or inside, or whatever it was. I don't remember.
So the other part, though, that's often depicted with time travel is that there's some barrier, if you will, like the sound barrier, or
like in the old show Time Tunnel.
Yeah, or I'm thinking Time Cop.
Yeah, Time Cop
is another one.
The Time Cop is very similar to Time Tunnel.
There's a lot of movies along that line where it's like you have to. I mean, hell, Back to the Future is a really crude but good example, where there's some speed or something that you have to reach to break the time barrier.
Yeah, like the
to
sound.
Be able to go into.
Yeah, and it's definitely not 88 miles per hour. And then we haven't even
88 kilometers.
I mean, we haven't even talked about Einstein's, theory, and about how essentially if we were to travel at the speed of light, we would stay the same age. Yet everyone that didn't travel with us, would age immensely.
And I just watched Flight of the Navigator.
Love that movie.
And that's watching it as a kid, you don't really pick up on the fact that that's what they're saying, that he didn't age because he traveled at the speed faster than the speed of light. And so for him, it was only 4 hours, but for everybody else, it was 8 years.
Yeah.
Sorry if you haven't seen the movie, I just ruined it for you.
Spoiler alert.
But yeah, so it's that, and that whole idea of as you approach the speed of light is echoed in other movies.
Right.
Interstellar is a really good example.
Yes.
They go to that planet which is close to a black hole. For them, it's a matter of like 16 minutes. For the guy who's in orbit, it's been 16 years and he thinks they're dead, right? So I think that the math, as we understand it today, supports the idea that time slows down the faster you approach the speed of light.
Right, which is why I am not a believer that the concept of time is not real, that it is man-made only. Because black hole theory shows that time itself does slow down.
But, so here's where I'm going to have to challenge that a little bit. We have so if you take the presumption that time is a man-made concept, then everything that we look at and measure and we apply time to is therefore flawed.
Because it's man-made.
Because the concept of time is man-made.
Oh yeah, and that's why
So-
I don't agree.
But that's
with
what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But your argument is that look at black hole theory. Black hole theory supports time. No, time supports black hole theory. Time is a man-made concept. Ergo, time is not applicable to black hole theory.
You just got real nerd on here.
Sorry.
Speaking of nerd, let's talk about your other theory that has blown my mind about time being a swimming pool or whatever.
Yeah, so it's like, and I've actually revised that a little bit to say that time is almost like a bubble. So you remember when you used to play with bubbles as a kid? He's coming back to town. You know, we get to get in. Sorry, I couldn't resist. Anyways, if you got your finger wet, you could put your finger into the bubble. Sorry, let's try to be grown-ups here for 5 seconds, please, so I can get through this. Okay.
I'm not a grown.
If you got your, how else can I say it that's not going to be?
You got your finger hydrated,
Yeah, not lubed up or
not moist.
Then you could pass it through the wall of the bubble, and the bubble wouldn't pop.
Right.
So, to me, time is like that bubble. It's always there. The past, the present, and the future coexists all the time in the same space. If you have the right conditions, you can move within the bubble or interact with different parts of the bubble without rupturing time, because you have the right understanding of how to interact with the bubble.
Well, and you know, we had talked about this before when we talked about ghosts. Is, you know, we talked about, are we just seeing images from other dimensions? Well, the same can be applied there. Are we just seeing images
Yep.
from a different time that is actually existing? It just doesn't know that we've passed into its bubble, or vice versa.
Well,
Like, how many times spirits, things like that, are things that we've seen? Were we seeing things from the future, and that's why we didn't understand, because they weren't wearing Victorian
Right.
clothes or whatever,
exactly. Or
aliens?
The other thing, the other part of it is if spirits, if time as we understand it is applicable to us because we are in the physical plane, is time non-applicable in the non-physical planes? So in the spiritual plane, if time is not applicable, then seconds or milliseconds have passed between the time when someone died 500 years ago and now, or between the time that someone dies 500 years from now and now.
Right, and it's like, I don't know, because this contradicts other theories, but it's like, I have to believe that time is real because it was something that we as a species couldn't help to do. We couldn't help but count the moons or track the stars, you know, or watch the sunset and say, oh, it happens at this time and this time and this, you know what I mean? It's like, our brains needed to fill in that gap. And was that gap there because...
Well, and so to carry on from that, let's say that on another planet, in another galaxy, or even its own galaxy, another species is evolving or has evolved. Did they go through the same construct?
Right.
Did they devise a methodology to predict and analyze the aging, for lack of a better term, of matter?
Right, and let's say that their species doesn't have death. Would they have bothered? Is it death that drove that need to count? Or was it the need to look back and see where we came from? Because I don't feel like time was ever about the future. I always feel like time was always about the past.
Yeah.
I mean, it became that, sure. It's like, oh, I gotta be somewhere.
Right.
Which I always wonder, I'm like, God, how did people get, you know?
Yeah. Well, they were constantly running around saying, I'm late.
For a very important date. That dude had a clock.
He kept checking it all the
And
time.
he's a rabbit. He's fast. Makes
Did you
no
just
sense.
say wabbit?
No, I said rabbit.
Okay, because
Different fan base. Different fandom.
So yeah, I don't know that. So I'm with you in that. I think that time could be. Well, here's the thing, and I'll say it like this: time. I'm trying to think how to put my words together. I don't think time is a man-made concept. I think that our understanding of time is a man-made concept.
Correct. I would say the same thing, that we put our ideas,
Right.
but that's what we've done with everything, and they constantly evolve. I mean, look at physics, look at science, look at magic.
Right.
Look how that's evolved. The magic of yesterday is the science of today.
Right.
Right? And so, yes, I think we have put on it as much as we can. But I still surmise that the way that we're going to be able to travel through time is as observers only. I don't think that we'll be able to physically travel in time. I think that we'll be able to be there via hologram or via like a chronovisor where we'll be able to just watch.
And something else that I've talked about with you in the past is, what if you can only go back in time or even forward in time to a genetic relative? You can temporarily transfer your consciousness, not transfer even, copy, let's say, your consciousness to that relative, either in the past or future, to experience things that they would have experienced at that time.
Right. So not like taking over, not a possession, but just
a
riding.
A conscious observer.
Yeah, you're just taking a ride.
Right. You're seeing the
yeah,
world.
and I said that in the beginning of the episode was, is it through blood?
Yeah.
Is that the only way?
Well, and so at that point in time, I was thinking blood in the aspect of you can physically go to the future as long as you're tracing the lineage of something.
Right. So does that mean, and then if that's the case, if you can go forward even through your own blood, if you don't have kids, you're screwed.
Not necessarily. If you have siblings and they have kids, then you're.
Well, it all it depends on, I guess, how heavy the.
But the genetic profile. I mean, hell, I'm on Ancestry DNA.
Same. Yeah.
And I probably check it maybe once every couple of weeks, and every time I check it, they found 24,000 new distant relatives.
Yeah, same thing, and they discover more areas that you're from because of those new relatives and things like that.
So, I mean, the idea that your genetic markers, although likely degraded as you pass through those different distant relatives, are still there. And so the genetic marker for you may somewhere live in the genetic marker for me. And so if that's the case, then I've had kids. You could travel my lineage because there's genetic marker similarity there with yours.
Right.
So I don't think it has to be 100% DNA match.
Well, it wouldn't be. I mean, once you get to your kid, it's already 50%.
Right.
Yeah.
So,
and even then, it's not. I mean, it's interesting because my brother and I both come from the same two parents, and we both did Ancestry DNA, and our results are very different. Like we have some Swedish in our family that I found out we had. It's like number 3 for me. It's like number 6 for Tommy. Like his genetic makeup. It's really interesting, like how genetics works, because it's like more of those aspects went into my creation than did his, right?
Yeah.
More of the German aspects went into his than mine, or whatever.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. It's something I just assumed it would be exactly the same. But I mean, I guess that's why we don't look the same, right? We are our own persons.
But you're both. I mean, there's some things that you got that are saying, like, you're both tall.
Oh, for sure.
You're both blonde.
And that's why, like, my half sister and my half brother, it's a bigger difference,
right?
In the genetic markups. As my dad, like I have a lot less with my dad because he's only, a portion,
right?
So 2 portions.
So to wrap things back around.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to say real quick. I watched this documentary on time travel years and years ago, and Stephen Hawking was on there. And
There's no S on the end of his name.
I didn't say an S.
You did.
Stephen Hawking. Mr. Hawking. Ooh, that's hard not to say that. He is not a proponent of time travel, surprisingly. I would have thought if anybody would have been, it was him. And he got on there and he did a thing, and this is why. Now, I'm sure there's more to it. I mean, it was a 45-minute documentary. Yeah. His segment was 5-10 minutes. Right. He said his proof was this. He created a party, a time travel party, that said, hey, all time travelers, come to this date and time, come to this place, blah, 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 let's celebrate. And they decked up his whole house and like all the welcome time travelers, and this was a big thing. So it was on like NBC, so it was like a big, so people would have been able to see it and blah blah. And he said the fact, and they waited, no one showed, and that was his proof. But, and I'm like, we don't know what restrictions would be or
we've talked
things
about
like
it before to geek out a little bit more about Star Trek having. When you get later on in the years of Star Trek,
you just go around the sun.
They have but later on in the years when the Federation has their quantum ships and everything, you get into the quantum directive.
Yeah,
so it's no longer just about influencing societies that haven't yet developed.
I don't even want to talk about the Traveler and Wesley. Man.
Oh, my God. But anyways, so
or wormholes.
Well, yeah, we haven't even talked about wormholes or.
But yeah, do I think time travel will be eventually possible? I do. I absolutely do, and I think that people are traveling now. Well, they are coming to our different times all the time, and I think some of the phenomena that is out there may be because of that.
Well, one of the things that I've postulated a little bit is that if people are visiting us either from other dimensions or other times, and they're wearing some sort of a suit that allows them to interact with our space without us knowing it, that little glimmers or malfunctions in that suit could explain some of the phenomenon that we see.
It could be. In fact, Mothman is one that I've thought about being not alien or cryptid, but actually being a future time traveler, even with them being 7-8 feet tall, because the fact of the matter is we as a species are getting taller and taller and taller and taller. 50 years ago, me being 6'5" would have been a rarity.
Right.
Now, I'm short. Like, there's 7-8, lots of they're not just at circuses anymore. And they project that we will, as a species, in 100 years from now, most of us will be 6 feet tall.
Now,
and what if by then they're all 7-8 feet tall and they've gotten in this suit that they're able to travel through time?
Well, you look at, we're getting way off topic a little bit, but you look, it tends to happen. Look at the dinosaurs and all of that happened. So back, they grew really big. Mm-hmm. And it's speculated that the reason they grew really big is because the oxygen content was so much higher then than it is now, that they were just able to grow their muscles more and use their muscles more and so on and so forth. But
that's why I hate that theory where they say Bigfoots can't exist because someone that big and that tall wouldn't be able to stand up. And I'm like, dinosaurs say differently.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I'm wondering about is since we don't really have a good we can mathematically prove gravity, but we don't really have a good way of detecting or measuring gravity.
Right. Yeah.
And so it makes me wonder if the Earth's gravity is changing. So it's not pulling down on us as much as it used to.
Well, it has to be.
And that's why we're getting taller.
It has to be because the moon is getting further and further away from the Earth.
2 inches every year.
And, it's interesting because one thing I've always said is like, I always wonder if the moon does provide some sort of power, some radiation that creates power, can that explain some of the magic from hundreds of thousands of years ago, because the moon was so much closer. To them it was massive. Right. Our supermoon is still not as big as theirs was.
Right.
I don't know. Just a thought. But the moon is, and so that does affect gravity. The moon does. So is that pulling us?
Yeah.
Right? Because like in the Expanse and stuff like that, show those people that have grown so tall from
Right.
living in space.
Right. So, wrapping it all up here for this particular episode of FearScape Unhinged, I also think that time travel theoretically is possible.
Mhm.
I don't know, though, if it's physically possible.
Yeah, I agree. I do not think it's physically possible. I don't think we'll ever physically travel. I think if that were to ever be a case, things would be far more messed up than they are.
Oh, yeah.
But at the same time, if we don't look at dimensions and we look at the Mandela effect as being an effect of time travel
Right.
instead of dimensions,
I mean, well, but think of it this way: if we're existing in our pocket of time, and we don't know any different, things could change for us, and we would never know.
yeah, we wouldn't. We would never know.
So only those who are able to travel outside of time would know.
Yep.
So who's to say that Hitler coming to power was not an accident, or
Right.
not intended to happen, or this COVID stuff was not an accident or not intended to happen, or it was supposed to be worse, but it wasn't. Who knows? Because we would not know if somebody had effectively altered the timeline.
Yeah, that already makes me start thinking of Christian's idea of God's plan. I don't want to get into that. That's a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation, but it made me start thinking about that. But yeah, that's good. Yeah, good wrap up on that.
Yeah.
Thank you guys for tuning in. This was a little idea of what we kind of think about time travel. Just a reminder to check out all our stuff, FearScapePodcast.com. There on the store, you can get t-shirts and stuff. Check out this new one that I'm wearing that I designed. Yeah, this is for my Louisville peeps. We got the Pope Lick Monster, Louisville's hide-and-seek champion. So that's just one you can get. We got a bunch of new ones and stuff like that. And check out, all of our social media, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, the Facebook, at Facebook Pod, but everything you can find on FearScape Podcast.
Pretty much that's your jumping off point. FearScapePodcast.com gets you to everything else. So,
especially Patreon.
Yeah, Patreon is good. If you like the content that we bring you, you like the podcast, you like FearScape Unhinged, you like the other things we drop out there, Patreon is a good way for you to support us with as little as $5 a month. We have 4 different tiers. Some of those tiers get you free t-shirts, like maybe the one Stefan's wearing, or some others that we have out there.
Yep.
So please consider supporting us monthly so that we can continue to bring you awesome content.
Yeah, and part of that getting on Patreon puts you to a very special secret Blanket Huggers Facebook page where only people on Patreon get to be a part of, where we could do some special Facebook Lives just for you guys to answer questions, maybe have Vashti on to do live readings. You never know what we could do if we've got some access to some other things. So, but other than that, we love you guys so much. Thank you guys, as always, for sharing, and make sure to hit that thumbs up. Make sure to hit that subscribe button, and even that little bell so you know when we put out new videos, because even the podcast is now on YouTube.
Yep.
So make sure to check all that stuff out, and thank you guys so much for tuning in. This has been Stefan. I'll catch you on the flip side.
This has been Josh. The truth is out there.
And stay safe out there, guys, during all of this COVID stuff, and make sure to hold those blankets extra tight, because things tend to get spooky when they're unhinged. Good night, everybody.
Hey, good night.